Hello, my name is Augie Masucci. I spent the last year traveling around the world and seeing issues firsthand. Even though I had a scare getting the content of a Q-tip stuck in my ear, it's alright. I survived. I learned a lot, and I'd like to share some of the things I learned and how I grew over the past year. Before this trip, I viewed volunteer work that kids my age did as getting credits to look good on college apps, which unfortunately is sometimes how it goes. In those cases, I saw it as kids doing work to get it done. I got the sense that they would not actually be invested in the work they were doing, more like just going through the motions. This was my view on community service work and overseas volunteer work. As a result, and because of lack of motivation, I never did any community service work besides the service days that my school required us to do. And yes, I understand that even little things make a difference, but I never went away from any of these thinking, wow, I made a difference today. It was more, let's get this day over with so I can go back and hang out and, and God, I hope I'm not moving tires out of that river. This is how I was, and for the most part, this was the mindset of the rest of my classmates. Even entering into my gap year, which was geared toward global development, I was not convinced that I was going to make much of an impact, and I questioned the effect that I would have on the people I would be helping. In the couple of weeks before the trip, I learned about the term agent of change. I laughed when I heard the term. I looked at it from the most fundamental, narrow-minded standpoint. I figured an agent of change is just someone who does anything to better the area around them, as in turning off lights and closing doors when air conditioning is on, etc. And as stubborn as I am, I decided that my views would never change and this trip would not have much of a profound effect on me. Well, I was wrong. For a long time before I embarked on the trip, my priorities were sports, getting by in school, hanging with my friends, parties, and girls. It was very narrow-minded. Everything else, like what is going on in the world and politics, were just concerns for people older and more mature than me. I would leave those things for future Augie to deal with. And so I applied to college with no idea of what I wanted to do except play sports. I applied to a group of liberal arts schools that, yes, give me the options to explore my interests academically, but more important to me, were schools where I could see myself making a varsity sport. Nothing else really mattered. Fortunately for me, my older sister had done a semester in India through her college, and my brother had taken 2 years off to pursue his love of hockey. Because of the experiences and growth that my parents witnessed in both of my siblings, they pushed me to take a gap year. But I was not going down without a fight. Eventually, as it is most of the time, my parents won and I lost. My father defended the case for taking the trip by explaining to me that a lot of kids go to college because that's what we were supposed to do. Most of the time, we don't know why we want to go to college besides the very shallow explanation that that is what is going to get us a job when we are older. I heard this message and I knew that it held true for me. Still, I was not excited or convinced that the trip I would soon leave for would challenge the beliefs I had and the ones I did not know I had. What is development? I had heard the term development before over the news and in classes, but never once had I heard it be described, and I never thought to try to define it myself. It was a term that I was familiar with and could use vaguely, and that was good enough for me. I found that when we as a group first sat down to talk about the issue, we talked from our readings of Sachs's top-down approach and Isherley's bottom-up approach. We had not yet formed our own ideas of what the term meant to each of us as individuals. We had not yet formed our own idea of, and personally, I did not believe that it mattered what I thought about it at all. During this discussion, I was not surprised to see ideas like infrastructure, technological progress, and economic progress show up. These were terms that I had heard before. What did surprise me were ideas like value-based and sustainable. Further adding to my shock were the questions, whose standards? Who defines needs? Is there good and bad development? Of course I saw this and it made me question what I thought of it as. So as usual, I took the easy way out and stopping my tracks, put it out of my mind. The first time I was leaving the country to do community service work, I was a little nervous, and regardless of my views on volunteer work at the time, I was excited. We started by planting trees that were indigenous to the woods of Ecuador. The purpose of this was to set boundaries around the Satchellers farms, and while at the time I believed this would help them not have their land encroached upon by the neighbors that were more westernized, I soon found out that they put up barbed wire fencing above the trees we had recently planted. The idea of effective service work came up for me. Why couldn't we have just put up the barbed wire fence? I didn't understand why the NGO we were working through funded the planting of the trees and not the barbed wire fence that was eventually put in. Was the work we were doing actually benefiting the Satchel community? Is this how effective all volunteer work is? These questions stung my mind, but we started planting the village's cash crop, cacao, and I felt better about what I was doing. But that good feeling faded. What bothered me about this was that as we would be walking deep into the farmer's land to plant the cash crop, I would see many trees with their fruit still on, and in most cases rotting. I kept thinking to myself, if this is your source of income, why wouldn't you take the time to go through your entire farm and harvest all of your crops? How are we supposed to believe that this would help them in the long run? Maybe they go out and harvest half of what we planted if they can find it. But what's the point? From what I witnessed, even when they planted it themselves, they would not harvest their entire crop. So why would they feel the inspiration to go out and harvest the ones they put no effort into planting? I believe it would have been much more beneficial for us to have taught them how to dig the holes, put the chicken poop and fertilizer in, and plant the trees. And furthermore, to show them how to plant in straight rows and have their farms and more organized, so that it would not have been as much of a struggle to harvest their crops. I began to believe that volunteers end up getting a lot more out of the work they do than the people they are trying to help. After my experience in Ecuador, it slowly began to hit me that volunteers all have good intentions, and what they do is good intentions, but it is not always what is best or necessary for the community they are trying to help. I believe that it is necessary for a person to spend time with the community, learn through interactions and conversations what truly are the problems facing that community, and then go and figure out a way to help side by side with that community. That idea was rooted for me when we traveled to South Africa. We landed in South Africa and I felt like it was going to be a vacation. Coming from India where everything is packed and you have no room to breathe, being in South Africa was the polar opposite. I knew that this was supposed to be the most emotionally tolling part of the trip, but I was more focused on getting to the beach and getting tan. I had a big wake-up call when we got to the Pledge Aid Foundation and were asked to fill out a little questionnaire on the HIV virus. I realized I really did not know much about it. It asked questions about transmission, the way it acts inside the body, how it reacts to ARVs, and stigma. The questionnaire made me feel ignorant. I was thinking, here's a virus that has ravaged South Africa and many other countries, and I've heard it talked about all the time, but I know nothing about it. This meaning that when I thought about HIV, I imagined the commercials I've seen on TV, the malnourished kid sitting in the sand with the mud brick house in the background. So this put in my mind the idea that HIV is a death sentence. Also that it not only affects people in a continent very different than the one I lived on. I amazed myself with how stupid that rationale is. Thankfully, I had the unique opportunity to see the virus and the people affected by it firsthand. That experience led me to see the true tragedy behind the virus. I learned that in most wealthy nations it has been deemed a chronic illness. It is tragic that that cannot be true all over the world. Thankfully though, in South Africa, we were working with caretakers who lived and possibly grew up in the townships they worked in. Because of this, the people they cared for were more comfortable around them and could relate to them better. Also, the caretakers knew what was actually going on and the issues they faced. It would have been much different if the caretakers were outsiders who were just looking in for the brief amount of time they had to be in the townships. Because of the intense care administered by the caregivers, more people were being educated on the reality of the virus. I was amazed to learn that a lot of people living in the townships in South Africa also saw the virus as a death sentence. I thought, how could people live around it every day and not know its true form? But then I also thought, how could kids like me with resources like the internet not go out and take 5 minutes to learn about it as well? My complacency, and I believe the complacency with a lot of kids now, is wrong. It made me think to my time in India teaching kids that were so enthusiastic to learn, but did not have the resources to get a proper education. In India, we were told what goals we were supposed to reach with the children by the end of our time with the NGO. After about a week of trying to teach all the kids the ABCs and numbers 1 to 20 and getting nowhere, I realized the goals were never going to be reached. The first day I tried to teach my class greetings. After a little while, I began to realize that they just kept repeating what I was saying. Then the project manager, a kid not much older than me, came over and explained it to them, and they were getting it down in less than half the time I had already spent on it with them. Because of this, I noticed the struggle that is the educational system in India. Unfortunately, the only teachers that the kids get are volunteers who most of the time cannot communicate clearly with them. So I kept this in mind and held back my frustration and did what I could do to help. I noticed the importance of volunteers that are localized or have a sufficient way of communicating with the people they are working with. With the correct teachers, even if they are just volunteers, these kids, who walk them walk themselves to school every day. My class was ranged from ages 2 to 6. Could get the education that they hoped for. I imagine myself as a 6-year-old kid just out of preschool and entering kindergarten, knowing that this would be the first year I had to do homework. At 6 years old, I already dreaded the thought of doing homework and going to school. That's ridiculous. The reality facing most of the kids that I taught was that they would end up being tuk-tuk drivers or street merchants. I'd like to think that I helped them a little, but chances are they have forgotten most of what I've taught them because another volunteer has come in and filled their minds with something new. It is unfortunate that they cannot get a steady education, but the volunteers, myself included, get a lot out of seeing the schooling system in impoverished India. I believe that it gives each person that participates not only a new view of education abroad, but also gives them a chance to reflect on the way the educational system they grew up in works. It can lead them to question, as it did me, is our educational system perfect? And are there more effective ways to educate children? Volunteer work is an incredible thing. It has potential to make a difference in the community you work in, but more importantly, it gives the volunteers a new perspective and hopefully makes them question their beliefs. At least that's what it did for me and all of the kids that came on this trip with me. So the trip's almost over. I sat in a cabin in Virginia for over a week with nothing to do but think about the experiences that I've had over the past 7 months. My view on the world and my place in it has changed significantly. I no longer believe that I can just get by in life. I strongly believe that I will be cheating others and myself if I continue down that path. I feel in no way that I have much of anything figured out for myself, but I do have some things, and that matters to me. From this trip, I was forced to think about things deeper than what I was used to. I was no longer around kids that would let me escape into the world of ignorance. Most of the kids that journeyed with me on this trip were in a very different place than I was at the start. A lot of them seemed to like unpacking issues and diving deeper into conversations. It took time, and I got used to it. I don't think there's any going back to my old ways. I tried. I saw one of my closest friends in DC and hung out with her and a couple of her friends one night. And their attitude towards school and how awesome it is because they don't really have to go to class and don't have to hand in things on time seemed foreign to me. I knew that before this trip, all of that seemed like a dream, and I would have given anything to be in a place where I can do my thing and not worried about being held accountable. But the beauty of this trip is that it gave me some of the tools to hold myself accountable for who I am. It is completely up to me whether I use them or not, and I understand that. I learned a lot over this past year, things that I wouldn't have ever cared to learn about before, because I figured I wouldn't be interested in them, or I didn't know about them. I feel empowered. I know about issues on more of a ground level than some of the people that make the policies on how to deal with them. That idea has struck me. After going to meetings in DC and seeing our group inform the very people coming to speak to us about the global issues they work on, it forced me to see just how powerful kids my age can be and how much weight what we say can actually carry. Not because we have a degree or a master's, but just because we worked on the ground level and saw issues and how they're viewed firsthand. Because of all this, just getting by in school doesn't seem right. I know that before this trip I absolutely would have, and it's tragic, but a lot of kids do that. I'm fortunate enough to have the resources to go to a liberal arts college where I can figure out what I want to study and how my experiences will shape the rest of my life. And I don't think I'm going to figure out any of that anytime soon. I think over the course of my time in college and beyond, my experience over the past year and future things that I do will slowly be unpacked in my life, and things will start to piece themselves together for me. But I know that for me, volunteer work is more of a take than a give. I've learned a hell of a lot more from the communities I worked with than anything that I actually did for them. I see that volunteer work is necessary. Work not necessarily just overseas, but in America. I've come to understand the power that the U.S. holds when it comes to foreign aid and how people work to develop other nations. But I do not think that we are fully developed enough yet to tell people how it is done. I think it is important to improve the issues that we have in our own country before we go out and try to help other people. I believe it is important to build a relationship with the community that you're going to try to help instead of deciding from an outside perspective what is best for them. Something that works in one place will not necessarily work in another. Finally, I believe it is important to question your beliefs and the things you do. Ask yourself what your role in your community is. Why does developing a country 1,000 miles away from your own matter? And everyone's favorite, what does development mean to you? I'd like to leave you all with a quote by author Marianne Williamson. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate, Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. Thank you.